I have highlighted the hypocrisy in the European Union, where they are very keen to criticize human rights in places like China, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba. But they bomb Syria whenever they feel like it. They had no problem with the war in Yemen, which has gone on for 6 years. Millions are starving. They were obsessed with Hong Kong, where not one protester has been killed. And they are ignoring situations where police are killing protesters. Like, for example, in America, where there was even military called in some of the cities, which hasn't happened in Hong Kong either. If you look under the covers in Hong Kong, in National Endowment for Democracy, which is a regime change arm set up by Reagan in America, they've actually admitted given over 20 million towards organizing protests in China. That's political interference. They're selective in which part of the world that they'd like to condemn.
And do you think the law was necessary for our city?
I don't know that the law was necessary for your city, but I do think that it's your business, not ours. Unfortunately, the EU is much too close to the US agenda, and too often EU is complicit in atrocities that take place. At least 90% of the parliament are Atlanticist. We would disagree very strongly with this. We didn't come to Europe to kiss its arse. We came here to change it. If the European Union is going to have a good future, the European Union has to plough a more independent line. America started as a colonial project when they wiped out the native population in order to take their land. America itself does not respect international law. The result of that is a trail of destruction right across the world. We know for a fact that over 1 million people died because of the Iraq war. We know that the war was based on a lie. If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by the truth. And unfortunately, we're not getting enough of the truth. We didn't have the support of mainstream media who didn't want us to get elected because we see them as part of the problem, not part of the solution. Biden has said that China is a threat to America's security. That's actually a lie. That's not true. China is a threat to America's financial supremacy. China will be the world leader in my lifetime. If they're worried about human rights in China and Hong Kong, and if they think that things are not being done like they should, I suggest that they have a look at themselves first and sort out the problems that they're facing with our own citizens first.
Way hey, and up she rises, way hey, and up she rises, way hey, and up she rises early in the morning.
Dear good Scott Jr., it's Keybros. Welcome to a new episode of Soft Talk, where unlike BBC's Hard Talk, the interviewees won't find it hard to talk. Today we have a very, very special guest with us. He is a current member of the European Parliament, or MEP, representing his country Ireland, and he's called Mick Wallace. Mick is part of the political group Independent for Change and is also actively involved in foreign affairs committees within the European Parliament. Before becoming an MEP, Mick was a Teocht Dála, or MP, for the Dáil Éireann, which is the Irish Parliament, for 8 years. And aside from politics, he's also the founder, former manager, and current board member of his hometown football club in Wexford, which plays in the League of Ireland. So Mick, do you mind briefly introducing yourself to our audience?
How are you doing? I've lived a very varied life. I spent most of my life in construction. My business crashed with the banking crisis in Ireland in 08, 09, and I went into politics in 2011. Well, I'd always been interested in politics anyway, since I was a kid. I came from a house with 12 children. It was a very argumentative house, so politics was part of our daily diet from an early age. Wasn't that unusual to me, probably a big surprise to a lot of others. I only decided to run for election less than 3 weeks before the election, and I managed to top the poll, which was nice. I stood for the European elections in May 2019 for Ireland South, which is actually half of Ireland geographically. Obviously managed to get elected, which is great. I was bowled over by the support of the people from 12 different counties, 12 different regions, whereas before that I had only stood for election in one region. So it was great to get such support from half the people of Ireland. I'm in Europe now, pretty mad place. I work very closely with my Independence for Change colleague Claire Daly. When we were asked why were we coming here, I suppose the main reason was that we found that at home in the Irish Parliament, more and more decisions were being made in Europe and were literally being dictated to us. We actually had less influence over legislation at home than we would have liked. In Europe, there is a shortage of democracy in how the whole system works. It's pretty complex. I'm in the European Parliament, and that's one entity of three. The other one is the Commission, which are not elected by the people. Then you have the European Council, which is made up of the member states. If there was a full council meeting, the Prime Minister from each of the member states would go, and they would vote by majority vote on stuff. Some of it has to be unanimous. If there was a foreign affairs meeting, the Minister for Foreign Affairs from each country would go. Decisions are made in the European Parliament. That doesn't make it legislation. It goes into the trilogue where the Council, the Commission and the Parliament sit down and they argue over everything. When we got elected to the Parliament, we were very critical of the EU in that it had become a neoliberal club where the interests of business come before those of the people. We wanted to change that. Not only is the Parliament probably about 90% right-wing, the Commission is generally more right-wing than the Parliament, and the Council is even more right-wing again than the Commission. It makes it difficult for progressive politics, but it doesn't mean there's no hope, because sometimes good things do happen.
All right, Mark Got. So without further ado, let's begin with the first question. So you're one of the very few MEPs who actually voted against the EU's joint motion condemning the crackdown of protesters in Hong Kong. And you've also been very vocal about the EU's hypocrisy and also the US's involvement in Hong Kong. So can you explain why do you hold such a position? What is your view on the latest situation here?
First of all, I've never seen a government that I would say that I liked. I would be critical of just about every government, including Ireland's government, America's, France, Germany's, Russia's, China's. I find problems with most governments, and I've yet to see an ideal government. I have highlighted the hypocrisy in the European Union, where they are very keen to criticize human rights in places like China, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba. But they have no problem with over 300 human rights social workers being killed in Colombia in 2020. When the right-wing Chilean president had a crackdown on protests in October 2019, there was 18 protesters killed in the first week alone, and the EU had nothing to say about it. They have very little to say about the fact that the Israelis, for all practical purposes, are engaging in a genocide in Palestine on a regular basis. They bomb Syria whenever they feel like it. They had no problem with the war in Yemen, which has gone on for 6 years, where the Saudis, UAE, with Western support, have been engaging in a genocide in Yemen. It is horrific, and millions are starving. They were obsessed with Hong Kong, where not one protester has been killed, and they are ignoring situations where police are killing protesters. Like, for example, in America, where we don't even have a count on the number of people that have been killed. Not only have the police been brutal, but there was even military called in some of the cities, which hasn't happened in Hong Kong either. If you look under the covers in Hong Kong, from our perspective, we see in National Endowment for Democracy, which is a regime change arm set up by Reagan in America, they've actually admitted given over 20 million towards organizing protests in China. That's political interference. I actually don't approve of political interference in any country. I'm not saying for a second that I approve of how the Chinese government does everything. I think that America interfering or the EU isn't necessarily going to help matters. It's also pretty obvious that some of the leaders of the protests in Hong Kong have had meetings with far-right members of Congress in America, people that who actually called the military brought in against Black Lives Matter protests. They want one rule for what's happening in America and one rule for what goes on in other parts of the world. They're selective in which part of the world that they'd like to condemn. And a big problem with all this is that America itself does not respect international law. America has felt that international law was something for everybody else except them. The result of that is a trail of destruction right across the world. America started as a colonial project when they wiped out the native population in order to take their land. It has remained a colonial project only in other countries. Back in 1945, after the war, an economist said America has 35% of the world's wealth, but we have only 6% of its population. If we want to retain that, it won't be easy. We'll probably have to do it with brute force. We'll need a very strong military. and the rest is history.
Both the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs and the EU Commission have been openly opposed to the imposition of the national security law here. What do you have to say to your country's stance and also to the mainstream MEPs who believe in the Western narrative over Hong Kong? Do you think they're misguided about what's happening here? And do you think the law was necessary for our city?
I don't know that the law was necessary for your city, but I do think that it's your business, not ours. We have a lot of problems in Ireland. And I think we'll probably be better concentrating on them. We have a homelessness crisis gone on for 10 years, and we still haven't solved it. It's not rocket science. The state is reluctant to build state housing for the people. They've refused to see housing as a human right. If they're worried about human rights in China and Hong Kong, and if they think that things are not being done like they should, I suggest that they have a look at themselves first and sort out the problems that they're facing with our own citizens first.
So as a member of certain European Parliament committees and delegations on foreign affairs, what is your view on the EU's foreign policy in general? Given that you've been quite vocal about the detainment of Julian Assange in the past, do you think the EU has moved too close towards the US, and should it move maybe closer towards Russia and China instead?
Unfortunately, the EU is much too close to the US agenda. US imperialism is still rampant across the world, and too often EU is complicit in atrocities that take place. We know for a fact that over 1 million people died because of the Iraq war carried out by the Americans with the help of their allies. We know that the war was based on a lie. Myself and Claire Daly have just written a book called The Coalition of the Unwilling. We were in court for 3 days. We were eventually brought to prison, and the story is in the book, and it also deals with the militarization of Europe. People might find it interesting. Do you do subtitles in Chinese then?
Yes,
or do you,
we do. Both English and Chinese, and probably even Irish, since that's the episode.
The first lines in the book is a quote from Julian Assange, which says, "If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by the truth." And unfortunately, we're not getting enough of the truth. The citizens of Europe, for example, do not approve of the American wars, but yet our politicians support too many of these American wars against the wishes of our own people.
Turning to a more personal question, how has your life been as an MEP so far? What is your daily routine? How many meetings do you have to attend? And do you have any major surprises or disappointments since you've become an MEP?
Nothing surprises me. I've been around too long. I'm even older than I look. Right? I'm 65 years of age and I've lived 10 lives. The European Union, I kind of knew it was undemocratic in many of its aspects before I came here, and that's probably been reinforced. The level of Atlanticism is probably been a bit of a surprise in some ways, not in others, but I would say at least 90% of the parliament are Atlanticist. And when I say Atlanticist, I'm saying that they are content to be linked to the US foreign policy. We would disagree very strongly with this, and we think that if the European Union is going to have a good future, the European Union has to plough a more independent line. Just for one example, the US support for Israel is off the Richter scale. The billions they give them every year for defense, this is not really defense, it's attack. The Zionist project is a colonial project, and Israel is determined to drive the Palestinians out of their own land. And they've been doing it since 47 at this stage, and that's a long time. The Americans have supported it 100%. The Israelis couldn't do it without the American support. And I would argue that the Americans could not continue to behave in the same manner as they do in relation to the Israeli-Palestine issue without the complicity of the European Union. If the European Union has the strength of character and the integrity to take an independent position on the Israel-Palestine issue, it will become more difficult for the Americans to continue to support the genocide of the Palestinian people. The EU has to become more independent. They've got to think more for themselves. I'm not saying we would become a wonderful organization overnight, but it would be an improvement. We have many problems, and being tied to the US agenda is a big problem for us.
The EU has recently concluded a bilateral trade investment deal with China. So as an MEP, what is your view on the deal? Do you think it is mutually beneficial for both sides?
I don't know which side is going to come out with the better. I wasn't sorry to see the deal go ahead. While I have opposed a lot of the big trade deals that have been done, like, for example, I opposed the trade deal between the EU and Vietnam last year on the grounds that, from what I could read from it and my analysis of it, it was only going to suit big business on both sides. The small farmers in Vietnam were not going to benefit from it, and the small farmers in Europe weren't going to benefit from it. It was a big business gig. Now, the deal done between the EU and China in January is really about protecting investors on both ends. We're already doing an awful lot of trade. I didn't see a problem with this going ahead. And I know that the Biden administration, they begged the EU to hold off. Let's deal with China together. What everyone learned from that is that the European Union is run by Germany for Germany. Everyone else after that. The Germans' biggest trading partner is China. Germans wanted that deal because it was in Germany's interest, and no one was going to stop it. The Americans have tried to stop the Nord Stream 2 gas line with Russia. Germany really wanted that to happen, or it wouldn't be happening. And the Germans weren't going to let the Americans derail that deal. Business is business, and business comes first with the Germans. That's why that deal went ahead. Biden has said that China is a threat to America's security. That's actually a lie. That's not true. China is a threat to America's financial supremacy. China will be the world leader in my lifetime, bar I get someone that knocks me off pretty soon. They will be the number one financial power. I'm not saying that they're going to behave wonderful in every aspect when they are. I'm just saying it's going to happen. And that's America's problem. They know that China is not a security threat. It's a financial threat.
I fully agree there. So you're a member of the European United Left, Nordic Green Left political group, which is of a socialist orientation. So how do you see China as a socialist state governed by the Communist Party? Does it match with your vision of socialism in general?
I have a nephew living in China, and he really likes it there. The group that you referred to that I'm part of, I've actually changed their name now to European Left, NGL. To describe them as a left group is probably a bit strong. It's got 39 members. Less than half of them I would classify as being left-wing. It was the group that we found most attractive of the 7 groups that were available to us. We're getting on pretty well in the group. The political outlooks of the group would vary a lot. It's not for me to speak on behalf of the group. I can really only speak on behalf of our own group of Independence for Change and myself and Claire Daly. Do I think that there is socialism operating in an ideal manner in China? Unlikely so. I see neoliberalism, capitalism in China like I see it in other places. It mightn't be as harsh in the sense that they've done a wonderful job at taking so many people out of poverty, unprecedented in the history of mankind. But I can see rising inequality now, a fast-growing middle class, and you have a huge, powerful business class. I think you have a big challenge to make sure that you don't end up like a typical Western capitalist society. Rising inequality and the dominance of the business class is a problem for you too.
Like Ireland, China has also been a victim of colonialism by the British Empire in the past. Well, after all, Hong Kong was a former British colony before it was returned back to China in 1997. So this history perhaps explains why Ireland has a much better relationship with China than with Five Eyes alliance countries like the UK, US, which have been openly hostile towards China lately. What is your view on the modern Ireland-China relations? Do you think it can improve in the future?
I think that Ireland as a country and in terms of its right-wing government, I think they are pretty keen to have good relationships with China because they too put business first. It will be in their interest to have strong business ties with China. We are more than keen to sell products that we produce to China. I would say that Ireland-Chinese relations will strengthen on the guiding principle for both will be business. The rhetoric that may come sometimes if the foreign affairs minister gets up and he criticizes something in China around human rights, a lot of that is just what I call it. It is rhetoric. It's plain to the gallery, but behind the scenes, do they want to do business with China? They sure do.
What is your view on Brexit since it's just occurred? Do you think it has accelerated the process of Irish unification? And do you want Ireland to become united in the future?
Yes, I do want Ireland to become united, but obviously it's going to have to come with the blessing of majority of the people that are now in the entity we call Northern Ireland. We can't force them to join us. When they want to join us, then I certainly would love to see a united Ireland. Is united Ireland closer to us now than it was before Brexit? Absolutely. The whole rigmarole about keeping Northern Ireland within EU trade arrangements because of the reluctance to do another hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, it makes common sense that we would work together as an island. But there are many challenges around that. We cannot railroad the community in Northern Ireland who say now that they don't want it. We've got to work in a democratic way, bringing around a situation where it becomes more attractive to them and we get to a place where the majority in Northern Ireland and in the Republic feel that a united Ireland is in the interest of all of us. When we got elected in May 2019, I expected the place to be dominated with Brexit, because it was such a big issue. I soon found out that while the media in Ireland talked about Brexit morning, noon and night for over 3 years, in Europe they were less obsessed with it. They would rather Brexit hadn't have happened, mostly for trade reasons more than anything else. At the same time, it wasn't the end of the world for them, right? Germany is the main player in the EU. Its sidekick France, Holland, Austria, the stronger countries financially, they weren't lying awake at night worrying about Brexit. They were keen that the eventual outcome would be one that was comfortable for both sides. Now, obviously, it's happened. How difficult is it? Who's going to lose the most? We've yet to see. The reason that Brexit happened in the first place is not unlinked to the fact that the lack of democracy that I spoke of earlier is a big part of what the EU is about. Mainstream media painted the picture that Brexit happened because, people were anti-immigrant and they wanted Britain for themselves. There was people who thought that. But the people who swung it in the Brexit vote were poor people who didn't feel represented by Brussels or Strasbourg. Sadly for them, their interests won't be represented in London either. But politics struggles to represent the interests of the less well-off, generally speaking, in the world.
You have been quite critical of the EU's institutions and policies in the past. So do you believe that Ireland should leave the EU in the future?
Well, first of all, whether I thought it or not, that would be a call for the Irish people. Right now, if there was a vote in Ireland, under no circumstances would they leave. Do I think they should leave right now? I would say no, they shouldn't. But I am wary of where Europe is going. I don't like the neoliberal nature of how most things are done. I am very worried about the increased militarization of Europe. I see the arms industry as being probably the strongest lobbyist here now in Brussels. That's a real worrying concern. I don't think it's something that the Irish people are madly interested in. Ireland is definitely pro-European. We see many benefits from having joined the EU, but there's a lot of problems too. Like, for example, we give away all our fish. Our fish is robbed by super trawlers from France, Spain and Portugal. We obviously got great help in agriculture, but it was selective. The help was mostly for the dairy and beef sector. A lot of other sectors didn't benefit from EU help. Ireland has lost over 100,000 small farms since 1970. That is a direct result of Irish government policy and EU policy. So, unfortunately, EU agricultural policy does not favour the small farmers in Ireland. It doesn't favour small business in Ireland. But that notion is not something that really registers at home yet. The majority of people would be convinced that they're better off still within the European Union. I like the idea of Europe being united, but I want it to be united in a different way, where they put the interests of the ordinary citizens before those of big business all the time, rather than vice versa. We didn't come to Europe to kiss its arse. We came here to change it. If we can't change it, then we'll take a different approach.
What was your experience like as an Irish TD? How is it different from being an MEP right now?
It is different, right? When we were in the Irish Parliament, we were independents. We would like to think that we changed it for the better. We probably challenged the status quo in a more straight, honest fashion. We didn't play games. We called a spade a spade. We looked to change the system. Even in a small way, I refused to wear a suit in the Irish Parliament. And for 18 months, they tried to make me dress up like a clown. Now, the dress thing is gone and everyone wears what they like. People might say, well, that's not really important. Well, yeah, I would say that they were the ones making dress important, not me. What it did help to do when we were there was it made the general population more interested in what was happening in the Parliament. Because the Irish Parliament, for a long time, like most parliaments, were seen as almost like an elite club. You had to be someone from this background or that background to get in there in the first place. You had to know this person or that person. You had to have connections. What we did was we tried to bring politics to the people, and we tried to make it known that everybody, anybody could become part of a parliament, but you just had to go work towards it. And no one should be intimidated into thinking they weren't good enough for it, because unfortunately, it was the people in the suits who came from the status quo who caused our banking crisis. We have rising inequality in Ireland. These guys are responsible for that and imposed austerity on the people of Ireland for 8 years. A lot of the people of Ireland still haven't recovered from the austerity. I would say that 50% of the people of Ireland today struggle to pay their household bills at the end of the month as a result of the austerity imposed by our right-wing governments. We challenged that as much as we could. We tried to change it. How much we changed it, how successful we were, that's to be decided by the people. But when we decided to stand for European election, myself and Claire Daly, we got elected by the people. That wasn't so easy. There were only 11 members went to the European Parliament in 2019. Now, there's 2 extra because of Brexit since then. But there was only 11 elected that time for the whole island. And we were independents. I had one guy canvassing with me. And we went around in a van and we had a bus with my picture on it. We literally just went from town to town across the south of Ireland. We had bugger all money to spend on it. Our competitors, the large parties, one candidate that I was running against spent over 400,000 trying to get elected. Wow. I spent 38 and I beat him.
Nice.
We didn't have the party machine support. We didn't have ads all over the place advertising us. We didn't have the support of mainstream media who didn't want us to get elected because we see them as part of the problem, not part of the solution. It was great that the people of Ireland acknowledged the role that we played in the Irish Parliament for those 8.5 years. Otherwise, they wouldn't have voted for us.
Turning to our last topic of today, you're the founder and former manager of Wexford FC. As a football manager myself, who is in charge of my university's football team in London, I find this part of your story extremely fascinating. Can you tell us a bit more about your experience as a football manager?
Oh God, we're going to start talking about football now. We could be here till this day next week. I've been very passionate about football all my life. I coached at under 18 level for 37 years in a row. 37 years, you're probably not even that old yet. I started my own football club in 2006, but I've been managing club teams and regional teams long before that. I always saw football as a social experience. I used to bring players in when they were about 15, 16, and I'd bring them through to 18. So I'd have them for at least 2 years, some 3 years. And I always told them, my first priority is to make you feel better about who you are. And my second one will be to help you develop as a footballer. I wanted them to develop as a person first. I wanted them to be happy. We built that into how we with the players. I coached under 16s as well. I coached under 19s, under 21s. I coached senior then at League of Ireland B level. It's something I've always been interested in. I've been involved in Italian football all my life. I'm a Torino fan. I have season tickets with Torino. I also have them with Inter Milan, who are owned by some Chinese buccos at the moment. I have season tickets with Atalanta. So I go to about 25 Serie A games a year when the stadiums are opened. I'm still involved in the football club at home. Football has been very good to me. It's given me incredible pleasure. I enjoy working with young people a lot. I admit that I probably have also mixed politics with it as well. I've tried to instill a desire for a fair society in my players through my football work as well.
Do you have any set of tactics or philosophy that you prefer as a manager?
I've studied Italian coaching for years. For 16 years, I brought an under-16 team to Italy every Easter for a week. And I used to get coaching from Coaching Academy in Torino, mostly connected with Torino Football Club. That was an amazing experience for me as well, because I learned a lot from the Italian coaches, read all their manuals, I watched their football. When I sit in the stadium, I analyse what's happening in a very critical fashion. I try and learn from it and see what the unit is trying to achieve. I concentrate very strongly when I go to a football game. I am really interested in what each team is trying to do and how it tries to make progress, how it tries to deny time and space to the opposition to prevent them from scoring, and how you create and maximise your own opportunities in a positive way.
Thank you very much once again. It is our massive honour and pleasure to have you on. If you like this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to our channel and press the red button below. We hope that all of you enjoyed today's episode, and please make sure to stay tuned for our next one. Bye.